Okay, yesterday we could not complete the class because of technical glitch, and we'll continue. Just to pick up a thread, annals historiography, what is known as annals historiography, is in fact the trend that started in 1930s in France, and then later on it spread to the other countries of Europe. And the name Annals came from the journal that is Annals of Economic and Social History. And in that journal, the people who contributed essays, they started pointing out the flaws in history writing. They started pointing out that under the influence of the positivist history writing, the history writing has become mostly one-sided. It is mostly focusing on the political dimension of the past, and that is inadequate. If we want to understand the human past in its totality, we need to understand the different dimensions of human life that includes political, social, cultural, as well as the geographical. So in a way, annals historiographer or annals historian, they have tried to focus on the interdisciplinary approach to understand the human past. And that is the reason the key phrase that defines the annals approach towards history writing is called as total history. So on this, I think we have covered already well. And now let us talk about the important annal historian. Mark Bloch was among the early pioneer of annals historiography, and his full name was Leopold Benjamin Mark Bloch, born in Jew family in France, and his father was also a historian. He was educated at Paris and Berlin, and he came under the influence of sociologist Emile Durkheim. And Mark Bloch joined First World War. After the First World War, he went back to editing the journal once again, 1929 to 1942. Then he became professor in Strasbourg University. And during the same time, he started his intellectual conversion with Lucien Favre, another important um, annals historian. And then during the, we see that the different articles that he wrote, he emphasized on the importance of social tradition and economic system. During the Second World War, he was captured by German soldiers, German army, as he was fighting against them, and he was put in the jail. And in that jail, in that concentration camp, he wrote a rough text which described his ideas of history, and that is published after his death. Unfortunately, he was shot dead by the German army, and that text is published as the historian's craft. Of course, the last chapter remains incomplete because before he could complete it, he was shot dead by the Germans. Among the different books that is written by Mark Bloch, the first one published in 1913 was The Island of France. And here itself, he makes departure from the traditional history writing, which was mainly confined to the political history. And in this book, he gives information about the soil of France, the different languages spoken by the French people, along with the archaeological remains and architecture. The next book, King and Serf, published in 1920, is a departure in a way because this book gives us an insight into the mindset of the serf. The history writing under the positivist influence was mostly remained confined to the attitude of the elite class, the landowner class, the king. But this book gives us information about it looks at history from the perspective of the serf. Serf were the people, a kind of bonded labor who used to work on the land of the landlords. Now, 1924, the book that became very famous is The Royal Touch. And here in this book, he explored the mentality of the people of medieval period of England and France. You know, in the England and France, there was a belief that if if you are having a skin disease and the king touches you, your skin disease will be cured. So he explored the psychology, mass psychology behind that kind of belief system. And he covers very long period from 13th to 16th century. And you know, he explored how the people anything that is being, traditionally believed, how deeply entrenched that belief system becomes. Because he narrates that even if the people are not getting cured by the touch of the king, they used to convince themselves that probably king has not touched properly, or I did not present myself properly, or I might have made some mistakes, so I should go again and again have the king touch to me, instead of questioning that kind of superstitious belief. So we see that psychology, superstitious psychology, religious belief, all that is explored in this book by Mark Blodge. Then French ruler society, it talks about the medieval ruler France, and he gives a very realistic picture of the agrarian life. Mm, from very beginning to the coming of the French Revolution. One of the important dimension of the annals historian is that usually they take a very long period and they try to analyze the changes that came in the structure. The structure are more clearly defined by Fernand Boudel. We will be talking about Boudel after this. Then in 1940, Mark Bloch published a book called Feudal Society, where he gives a very in-depth analysis of the development of feudalism in Europe. And main theme is that how the society will undergo a lot of changes. There is a structural relationship between the society, economy, politics, technology, as well as the psychology of the feudal world. The feudal lord, they used to consider themselves as superior, and the serfs, they used to consider themselves as inferior. And while studying all these things, he applies the knowledge of archaeology, agronomy. Agronomy is the science of soil and plants, cartography, folklore. A lot of things are being, preserved in the folk tradition, in the folk songs. That is also being explored by him. And he also employed economic theory and statistical method in his historiographical investigation. So the last book, which I have already referred, that is Historian Craft, which he penned down during the confinement when he was under arrest by the Germany, by the German people, by the German army. And this gives us idea about the Bloch idea of history. And here he says that, he compare if the history is science, like positivists said that history is like a science, it is like a social physics. And by understanding past, by understanding past or by studying past, you can formulate certain laws about the human society. He says that the history is a science in infancy. It is a science in the beginning. It is not, we cannot compare it with other natural sciences like physics or chemistry. And he make a comparison. He says that the plumber also drills the pipe, and the flute maker also drills the bamboo. But the purpose of the plumber is different than the purpose of the flute maker. The purpose of the plumber is to connect the pipe together, and he makes the hole, connect the pipe together, put a nut and bolt. So his work is over. His work is intended to put a nut and bolt or to fix the pipe to the wall. But the flute maker, the purpose of flute maker in drilling the bamboo is that when you blow air to the flute, it should produce a good music. So in the history writing, apart from science, it is an art also, because artistic presentation of the historical facts are equally important. So this book, Historian's Craft, is divided into the 4 chapters. In the first chapter, he says how history is a very serious science. Then the next second chapter is titled as Historical Observation. Uh, where he explored how the linguistic and social science technique can be utilized in understanding history in a better manner. The third chapter is historical criticism. It deals with how the historical evidences can be tempered with by forgery, how to evaluate the reliability of the historical record. In the fourth chapter, he discusses group psychology, and the fifth is he tries to analyze causation. Of course, the fifth chapter remains incomplete. As I said, before that he was shot dead. If we want to analyze the contribution of Mark Bloch to historical thought, the very significant contribution of Mark Bloch is exploration of the mentalities and making mentality as an important dimension of understanding history. We have seen his book Royal Touch, where he tries to explain the mentality of the medieval European people when they believed that it is by the royal touch that their disease can be cured. Collective thinking of the society, social psychology, he made it very important dimension of understanding history. He has done a lot of research on the development of feudalism and the functioning of monarchy. He has brought in the knowledge of geography, psychology, sociology, archaeology, agronomy, cartography, folklore, and linguistics. So in a way, his work has become multidimensional, multidisciplinary, and he also employed economic theory and statistical method in his historical investigation. So again, you see he is connecting history with statistical method. So this is what about Marc Bloch. And the next important annals historian is Fernand Braudel, born in France in 1902, known to have a very remarkable memory, very good understanding, and very sharp intellect. He started his career as teacher of history, but he began to realize, he started feeling that the history that is taught is quite a superficial history, and in order to have an understanding, better understanding of history, we need to connect it with the other discipline. Later on, he worked in the French colony Algeria, and at the same time, he started his correspondence with Lucien Febvre, another important annals historian. And this correspondence has contributed to his intellectual growth. Lucien Febvre has advised him, he wanted to write the history of Philip II, the very important, very famous king of Spain. And Fabre has advised him ki instead of focusing on the individual achievement of the King Philip II, it is better if you can explore how the Mediterranean Sea, that is north of Spain, have contributed or shaped the history. So he has approached that history from that perspective, and the book that came out as a result of his 20 years of work, he has studied a lot of resources, is the Mediterranean and the Mediterranean world in the age of Philip II. So this is a long name. In short, we can refer it as a Mediterranean. Because in this book, the hero is not King Philip, but the hero is the Mediterranean Sea. How the Mediterranean Sea, as an important geographical feature, has shaped the history of the region that he has explored in this book. In fact, during the Second World War, when he was reading and collecting sources for this book, as he was French, he was arrested by German and put in the jail. And it was in the jail that he gave shape to his book. Later on, when he came out after the end of the Second World War, he published it, and then later on made certain changes after coming out from the jail, and published it in 1949. 1945, the Second World War ended, but he took few more years to complete his book, gave proper references, and published the book, The Mediterranean and the Mediterranean World, and in the age of Philip II. And this is considered as a very important book written from the perspective of the annals historian. And it is said that it has reached to the very high watermark because he have a very significant contribution. And one of the very important contribution of Fernand Braudel is dividing the time into three different times. This is a bit complicated. You need to understand it. For example, a 20 years time is a very big time for an individual. A 20 years old boy may become 40 years old adult mature man. A 40 years man in 20 years will become 60 years old person. But that 20 years of time span is not a very big time to introduce social changes. So we see that the time is moving very fast for the individual. If you see me after 10 years, probably you will see a lot of changes in Dr. Khangai. I may not having hair at all. My beard will become more white, or I will become weaker, or whatever it is. So the old age will become more visible on me. But if you visit the department in 10 years, or if you visit the Nagpur city in 10 years, there will be certain changes, but the changes will not be as obvious, as visible as it is for the individual. Like if I go back to my town after 20 years, I will see changes, but the changes will not be very significant. But the changes for the individual, if I see my friend after 20 years, I will see that he has changed a lot. So what I am trying to communicate, or what Braudel is trying to communicate to you, is that for the individual, time moves very fast. For the society, time moves little slower. Social changes doesn't take place very fast. And beyond that, for the geographical structure, the time moves very, very slow. It takes lot of time, maybe centuries together, for the river to dry up. It may take centuries together for the forest to vanish. It may take millions of years for the mountain to vanish because of erosion. Indus civilization has flourished and it has taken maybe thousands of years or at least centuries together before it became extinct because of the geographical changes, river changing its course or drying up or whatever it is. So we see these three different speed of the time for human being and it moves very fast. For social changes, it moves rather slower. For geographical changes, it moves very slow. So these three different layers of time is explored by Fernand Braudel in his book Philip II, Mediterranean and the Mediterranean World in the Age of Philip II. And he says that there is an interaction between these three different timelines. The geographical changes will affect the social changes, will bring some social, cultural, political changes. The changes in the social structure will affect the individual. For example, in last 100 years, there had been a lot of changes in our society. And that has affected our mindset. You and me, if we had been born 100 years back, probably we would be thinking in a different manner. 100 years back, people may not accept the idea that the girls and boys can go together and study together in the college. But now that is a quite commonly accepted fact. That is commonly accepted phenomena for the simple reason that society has undergone change and that changes in the society, the collective mentality of the society affects the individual because we are being brought up in the 21st century. All right. So these three different timeline is an important contribution of Fernand Braudel, and he calls it as Daries. Daries is a French word that means the time span, and there are three different time span: geographical, social, and individual. There is a long-term Daries in case of geographical feature. There is a medium-term Daries, that is social forces and structural changes, political structure, cultural structure, and changes in the way of thinking. And there is a short term, that is a surface disturbance. He calls those events. You know, the history, he says that history is only on the surface. People are writing history only on the surface. They are talking about events, they are talking about individual, but beyond that individual work and beyond the accomplishment and the achievements of the individual, if we understand the social structural changes, we will have a better understanding of history. And going beyond that, if we understand the geo-historical changes, he uses the term geo-history. That is a combination of geography and history. If you understand that, then only your understanding of history will be having a sharper perception. You will be able to understand history in a better manner. This short term is called history even mentally. That is a French word. Surface disturbance, he call it as a surface disturbance, immediate problem, immediate action, immediate awareness. And he says that is a very superfluous kind of his writing. He organizes his history in the three different time layer, and he says that there is an dialectics. There is a communication between these three layers. Each phase require different approaches. He integrates geographical, economical, political, and cultural into the total history. So the total history that Annals try to study, where there is an integration of geographical, economical, political, and cultural history. And then this book is divided into the three different parts. The bottom layer, in the part one, the bottom layer, he calls it a geo history. This already I have explained to you, three different layer. Then in the part two, he talks about the social, political, and economic changes. It takes maybe 5 to 50 years, and the event and politics is the shortest time. So I have done a pictorial presentation here. You see here at the bottom, there is a geographical structure, and the changes in the geographical structure, it affects the political, socio-cultural structure, and this later on affects the individual and the events in history. So this is the Mediterranean Sea, and surrounding to that sea, you see here, there is a Spain, there is a Morocco, Algeria, and this Mediterranean Sea has, in fact, profoundly influenced the history of this region. That is what Fernand Braudel has written in his book, The Mediterranean and the Mediterranean World in the Age of Philip II, where he gives a lot of importance to the Mediterranean Sea as an important determining factor as the sea has shaped the history. Next is the book that is written by Brudel is against civilization and capitalism, where he talks about the growth of civilization and the process of capitalism. Now, as I told you earlier, Annals does not subscribe to any one particular ideological thinking, but it tries to encompass or integrate history writing with a another different discipline. So we see that within the broader term called annals historiography, there were historians who had difference of opinion. And we see there are a bit of differences. For example, these two people, Mark Bloch and Fernand Budel, we see that Mark Bloch or Lucien Febvre, another historian, they give a lot of importance to mentalities, that is the psychology, collective psychology of the people in a particular period. But Fernand Budel does not give a lot of importance to the mentalities. On the other hand, he gives a lot of importance to the changes in the geohistory, geological pattern, as well as the other structural changes that comes in the political and social structure. So we see that there is definitely a difference. Now, if you want to understand the importance of the annals history, we can understand that this started from France, then spread almost all over Europe and to America, Brazil as well. They give emphasis on the total history, and it's because of that many other dimension of human past has brought into the history writing. They have emphasized on the interdisciplinary approach. They believed in the structuralism. They believe that there is a geo-historical structure. Then based on that, there is a political, social, and cultural structure, and understanding this structure is much more important than just understanding the what an individual has done and how the event have taken place, because individual and those events are in fact shaped by these structures. Three layer of time and their interconnection is explored by Brudel. He gives phrase like geohistorical time. The historian like Mark Bloch has given a lot of importance to mentalities, and they use the historical psychology, understanding the psychology of the people living in the particular historical time. And in order to have a proper understanding of the history, we must understand the psychology of the people living in that area. We just can't presume that my great great grandfather should also think like me. He might be having a different thinking because he is a product of his age. The people 200 years back, 300 years back also thought on the same line that we think today is a falsification, is a wrong thing to assume. And in fact, that is called psychological anchorism. You anchor being rooted in the particular time span. So if you are psychologically anchored in today, you will have difficulty in understanding the past. We need to unlearn many things and try to understand the people psychology of that particular period from a different perspective. Uh, Under the influence of the annals, different sources brought into the limelight, they were begin to be studied and the history begin to be written from the different perspective. Uh, it was not based on any particular doctrine. Then there is, and generally annals do not encourage the microhistory. Generally, usually they took a very longer span, as we have studied in the different books that we have discussed. And through that longer time span, what are the structural changes has came in the human life? That is the main emphasis of the annals historian. Annals historiography is also criticized as no trends of historiography is perfect. It is criticized by stating that as the annals have tried to connect history with number of discipline, it has become a very complicated history. We don't know what kind of discipline we should incorporate and what kind of discipline we should leave, and it becomes very complicated to understand, first thing. Secondly, though annals tries to claim as a total history, but in connection to history, they have mostly explored geography and sociology, and by and large, they seems to have ignored politics or political history, which is also an important dimension of history. The research method has complicated and confusing. By connecting to the number of discipline, it has become a polymorphous discipline. Polymorphous means something that speaks to us in a different voices, multiple voices. They also talk about environmental determinism, that it is a environment or it is a geography that is a main determining factor in history, but that cannot be accepted. If you just take a cursory look at history, The geography of Maharashtra, it remains same for centuries together, but it has not given birth to Shivaji after Shivaji. Shivaji was an unique person, so that uniqueness, unique personality, and their contribution need to be acknowledged, which Annals seems to be ignoring or undermining, if not ignoring altogether. So if we have to sum up, we can say that the annals historian, they have emphasized on total history. They have underlined the interdisciplinary approach towards interdisciplinary approach to understanding the human past. They believed in structuralism, structures. They believed in mentalities, that historical people had a different mentalities. They believed in geohistory. Geography plays an important role in shaping history, and they are centered in the contradiction among the annals, as it is not based on a one simple doctrine. The annals historian, they try to approach history from the multiple perspective, and they are bound to have a certain kind of differences in approach towards history writing. So this is where our annals history discussion on annals history ends. If you are having any doubt, you can ask.